Great. So I would encourage the panelists now to come up because this is the second part of the discussion. And our panelists, I'm not going to read the whole bio, but it's Ambassador Raymond Flynn. Tom Gosnell is the president of the American Federation of Teachers in Massachusetts, and Kathleen Mears, who's the superintendent of Catholic schools for the Archdiocese of Boston. And what I've asked these three panelists to do is to have them, each one of them, give us, 7 to 10 minutes or so of their observations about sort of the state of play in education and Catholic education and these topics. So I guess in the interest of sort of balance, I'll have Tom Gosnell, and I'm going to have you folks come up here, and I'll have Tom Gosnell come up first. Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm Tom Gosnell, President of the American Federation of Teachers in Massachusetts. Good morning, all. I want to give you some information about my own background because I think context is very important. So K through 6. Well, first of all, I am the son of Catholic immigrants. And K through 6, I went to public schools in Boston. And when I was in the 6th grade, and I was a good student, I wasn't fabulous, but I was good. And my mother went up to the 6th grade teacher, and in those days, the parents did whatever the teacher said. And my mother said to the teacher, should I send him to Latin school or to a Catholic school? And the teacher said, send him to a Catholic school. So that, of course, is where I went. Years later, I discovered that my 6th grade teacher was an intensely devout Catholic who joined the Third Order of St. Francis when she retired. I went to a huge elementary school. If I had any other 6th grade teacher, I would have wound up at Boston Latin School. So I went to parochial school for 2 years. I went to a Catholic high school. I went to a Catholic college for my BA, but I have an MA from a public college, and I've taken hordes of courses since I've got my master's, mostly in private secular and public secular colleges. However, I did have one experience that was quite an experience. I am a Latin teacher. And there aren't exactly a multitude of courses in Latin. So one summer I decided I needed some more Latin courses. So Emmanuel College in Boston, which at that time was an all-girls college. However, the summer school was co-ed. And they had some wonderful Latin courses. So I enrolled at Emmanuel. Well, as it turned out, not only was I the only guy on campus, but I was the only guy who wasn't a nun in my classes. So this was a great experience, I've got to tell you, because they certainly gave me a lot of attention, these nuns. So it was great. So I taught in Boston, a Latin teacher. I taught at Brighton High School, Girls Latin School, which has now become Boston Latin Academy. And I have been a union official in various capacities over the years. I'm now president of the American Federation of Teachers. Very quickly on Catholic history in Boston, because that's a central part of this. There's no question about it. The discrimination against Catholics in Boston was fierce. It's hard for us to understand today that it could possibly have existed the way it existed. I mean, John Winthrop came to Boston in 1630. The first public mass in Boston was 1787, 157 years later. And it probably was very helpful that when it happened is that the Bishop of Boston at the time was French, and of course the French played a key role in American independence. If the bishop were Irish, one questions whether they would have had a public mass in 1787. But the school system was clearly Protestant. It advanced Protestant values. There was no question about that. And when we had this massive influx of Irish into Boston, A lot of them were incensed about that. You know, they used the King James Bible. That was a really important issue then. By the way, when I was in public school, we did have Bible reading, but the school I went to had many Jewish students, so consequently the teacher never read from the New Testament. She only read from the Old Testament. So there was a recognition of the student body that was in front of her. So Bishop Fitzpatrick, who was the third bishop of Boston and was a graduate of Latin school. And of course, he was very conversant with what I would call the Yankee leadership of Boston. He was a very, very bright, cultured man. And of course, at that time, the Catholic hierarchy in the U.S. began pushing for its own schools, believing one of the reasons is that the public schools were Protestant. He didn't favor that. He thought every Catholic should take advantage of the public services offered by the government. So he never became an enthusiastic supporter of public schools in the city, of Catholic schools in the city of Boston. Subsequent hierarchy were. So the prejudice was very, very clear. And the know-nothings were prejudiced. There's no doubt about that. You know, there are people who believe they advanced some very democratic ideas, which they did, but they were prejudiced. They were anti-Catholic, no doubt about it. So before the Civil War, we have what is really an anti-Catholic amendment to the state constitution. But that was eliminated right around the time of the end of World War I, and the current proposal was put in. That is not directed toward Catholics. In fact, the majority of Catholics at that Constitutional Convention, and by that time, Catholics have become a significant factor in Massachusetts politics and government, the majority of them voted for that amendment. It has been on the ballot twice. It was on the ballot in 1982 and 1986. And the proponent of that was Senate President William Bulger. I will tell you right now, if it were not for him, they would never have been on the ballot. He was a one-man train coming down the tracks to get this on the ballot. So groups in opposition came together. And I would say there were two major groups, not the only ones. And one were the public school advocates, and the unions were among those. You know, both the Mass Teachers Association and what was then the Mass Federation of Teachers. But this was also significant. Groups who had a great belief in separation of church and state were part of this coalition. They were a very significant part of this coalition. A number of them were religious groups. And then, of course, there were secular groups. The amendment lost 62% to 38%. Well, that did not deter Senate President Bulger. So he was able to get it on the ballot again in 1986. The same coalition came together. This time, the people voted against it 70% to 30%. In this state, to make clear, to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot, 2 different sessions of the legislature need to vote for it, and then it has to go to the people. Okay? There have been subsequent attempts to get it on the ballot. They have all failed. They have not gotten the votes in the legislature because the view was the people have rejected this twice, so why continue to pursue that? Now that's a lot of political and historical background that I think is really important. Now, I will speak both personally and as president of the American Federation of Teachers. I believe that one of the most important, overwhelming issues in this country is poverty. I am telling you right now, our kids are being cheated. They're absolutely being cheated. And poverty is a major reason why. You know, immigration in this country right now is very substantial. And I would follow what you said. We have echoes what happened back in 1840 and 1850, this anti-immigrant attitude. So poverty is very widespread among our children. And I think we need to assault poverty. But I don't agree with some of the solutions that have been offered today. For example, let me give you one thing that I think can be done. After my son got out of the local public high school, my wife and I believed he needed another year of seasoning before going on to college. So we applied to prep schools, and he got into Phillips Exeter. Well, let me tell you, I learned more than he did. And one thing I learned is no class had more than 12 kids. I want you to think about that, folks. No class had more than 12 kids. And these are privileged girls and boys. Privileged, let me tell you. No class more than 12. I submit to you that if every public school class were no bigger than 12, we would have quite an assault on poverty in this country. And the achievement of our students, even here in Massachusetts, would be absolutely greater. Now, what of course is the big issue? Big bucks. There's no way around it, folks. Public education is expensive. Education's expensive, wherever you have it. Big bucks. That is a major, major issue. So, I truly believe that in public schools, whatever their flaws may be, and there's no institution that doesn't have flaws, but when one serves the entire population, that is an absolutely major challenge. And services the poor students, and services special needs students, some of whom need extraordinary services. And English language learner students understand that many of these students are illiterate in their own language, let alone English. That's an extraordinary challenge. Now, when my son was at Phillips Exeter, let me tell you, the number of special needs students was probably Zippo. There were plenty of bilingual students, all of whom were absolutely fluent in English. Okay? So those are important differences. So I believe a greater investment in public schools is what is necessary in order to provide our kids even the best, to provide them with the best possible education. I believe the Education Act of 1993 went a considerable distance in providing more resources for our poor students. The problem is it's no longer in effect. We no longer provide that type of funding. And just one last statement, okay, as president of AFT Massachusetts, we are a labor union. Okay, so it is very important for me to get the best salary and benefits I can get for all my members. And I don't just represent teachers, by the way. I have classroom paraprofessionals. I think these people are essential, and I certainly believe in salary and benefits for them that are commensurate with the job that they do in the classroom. And secondly, and equally with this, I believe that any teachers union worth its weight has to be an advocate for quality public education. And that in particular, but not solely, I live in an upper middle income community. Hooray for the education that they provide. But kids in poverty need much support, and most kids in poverty are in the regular public schools. Thank you very much, folks.
I appreciate the history lesson. I'm relatively new to Boston and I didn't know all that, so I appreciate that very much. I'm Kathleen Mears and I'm the proud superintendent of the Archdiocese of Boston, and I'm representing all of Catholic education today in Boston and in Massachusetts, and it's a little bit overwhelming, so thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much, Jamie. First of all, I want to tell you a little bit about Catholic schools in Massachusetts. We have approximately 192 schools, and we educate a little under 57,000 students. That's what we did last year. This year it will be down a little bit. It will be a lower number enrolled. Many reasons why. A lot of them go back to what you were saying with funding. As a point of just knowledge for you, is I'm a public school graduate. I was well educated in a public school in Illinois, and if you want to go back to it, I graduated from the smallest public high school in the state of Illinois, but the last one that actually used a Section 16 of the township system to fund the school. So the farmland was still being farmed to help support the public school I attended. Very, very small school. High school graduating class of 22, and I was not number one, so there you go. But what I want to say to you is that I agree we need to help these children in poverty, and the Catholic Church stands ready. We have the space, we have the room, and I really believe that if all of us work together, we will help more children. I spent 31 years teaching and learning in the state of Indiana, which has a large voucher system. It's grown very quickly from 2011 when it was passed, and I was part of the group that worked to get that voucher system passed, and even more importantly, the tax credit scholarship, because that helps a lot of students too. And it's really, for me, it's about one thing. It's parental choice. And here's what I always ask myself. If I don't think that school's right for my child, I had the opportunity to put my child where I did think it was right for him or her. And I think all parents need that opportunity. See, for me, it's not really school choice ever. It's always parental choice. My church teaches that. The Catholic Church says up front, parents are the primary educators of their children. And so I believe in order to do that, we need to provide all parents with choice. It's just really an important thing, I think, if we're going to improve education. And I think working together, we will get much more done. The Catholic Church in Boston has 156,000 students enrolled in religious education. They're not in our schools. We want great educational options for them too. But if they would like to come to a Catholic school, we want to be able to offer that for them. And of course, the church does think that Catholic schools are a great way to learn not only about reading, writing, and arithmetic, but that fourth R, religion. So we want to make sure that we support parental choice opportunities for our students. It's really important. The history, what I do know is that many of the people who are in this room and many of the people who lead in this state and in this city are Catholic school graduates or Catholic school educated at some point. The church has done a great job. And when we talk about this, it's always very intriguing to me that this law only applies to grades 1 through 12, I think, maybe K through 12. It doesn't apply to preschool children, and it doesn't apply to college. And I don't understand that discrepancy or inconsistency. I mean, I don't really quite get that. If you want to take state monies and go to Boston College, there's not an issue in the world. But for some reason, there's an issue with K-12 education, and I don't understand that discrepancy. I suspect when the law originally was passed, not many people went to college at that time, so it would have impacted few people, and there wasn't this system of support for college education that there is now today. And the preschool part, I'm not really sure, why we don't do that. I don't think that the unions are against Catholic schools. I don't believe that. Many of the unions were probably educated in Catholic schools like you, and I think that as church we support Catholic unions. I mean, the church has a long history of social justice that says that we have to support the workers, and so that's still important to the church. That hasn't gone away. I just think what has happened here is that we haven't spent time talking to each other, and I don't think we've had a lot of conversation about this possible amendment or a tax credit. I think we say, well, we can't do that, so we just walk away from the conversation. Well, if we can't do that, what can we do? What can we do to provide parents with more options and more choice? Surely we can do something to help them. You know, one of my jobs in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis was to grow the special needs population. That was my job, to invite and make sure our teachers could assist more students with special needs. That's what we want to do here in the Archdiocese of Boston, and I think Catholic schools everywhere across the country are embracing that. So we want to work with you. We want to take children who are, and I'm going to use my quotes, hard to teach. We want to take those kids because we believe if the parents think we can do the job, then we have an obligation to try to do the job. And sometimes maybe we won't be as good as the public school, or not, I shouldn't say it that way. Sometimes we might not be as good as they fit for a student, but sometimes the public school isn't the best fit either. And it just seems like it's a monopoly. And I don't know if that's the right word, and I don't know if it's the right thing, but I do believe that parents can make good choices if they're given good information. And that's critical. That is something we have to take a look at, because how will they pick what's right for their student? And we also need to understand sometimes parents make mistakes when they make that choice, and then kids have to switch schools because they didn't make the correct choice. But I still believe that everybody in here wants what's right for kids. And if we all just band together under that premise, I think we'll get a lot more done. And who knows what we may, maybe we'll come up with something, a totally different idea that no one's thought of. But if we don't talk to each other and we don't work together, I have no doubt that the children of Massachusetts won't have all the opportunities that they deserve, and their parents won't have all the opportunities they need to make the right decision for their children. Thank you.
Good morning. Jamie, thank you very much and the Pioneer Institute for hosting this very important forum on such a critical issue. This issue used to be in the forefront in the political arena years and years ago, as Tommy Gosnell was talking about and the professor was talking about, but unfortunately the discussion hasn't really taken place except when it's raised by the Pioneer Institute, so I congratulate them for that. I recall those early days of this issue when I was a member of the Massachusetts legislature, and I won't try to replicate the expert testimony here today. You've heard it, and many of you are far more knowledgeable and conversant on this issue than I am. But maybe I can give a little bit of a political perspective, because that's what I've been doing for the last 40 some odd years, both at the national level, the international level, and the local level. I thought a lot about this when I received the invitation to participate in this conference. And what I was thinking about was, look what we're talking about in America today, or in Boston today, right? For the last 7 months, all we've been talking about is the Olympics coming to the city of Boston. I mean, every single day there's 6, 7 stories in the paper. As a writer myself, I've contributed to some of that conversation. But what happens when our governors and mayors and state legislatures, business community, all this energy going into bringing an Olympic event to the city of Boston dominates the whole conversation? Don't get me wrong, I was a professional athlete myself, and so nobody knows or understands or appreciates sports perhaps better than I do. Far better than I know politics, to be honest with you. But now that I'm more advanced in years, I look back at it now, the whole career, and I figure out, I'm thinking about what is really important. Is it sports? Is it Olympics? What is it? Why is the business community and the political community and the media so obsessed with these sideline issues when in fact the big issues that Tommy Gosnell and Professor were talking about, education, is the one that is really impacting all of us in society. I was interested in hearing the gentleman over here who said he's of Jewish faith. We're talking about special education. I was telling Ken Rosano this earlier today. I have a grandson who was born with a rare, undiagnosed neurological disease. He's a special needs child. And I have become so involved in special education and programs for handicapped kids, not only in the state but in this country, and speak all across the country on it, that I see the real flaws that are happening in education for these special needs children. Tommy Birmingham was a leader in this issue, and it's up the State House. Matter of fact, the first special education bill that passed in Massachusetts, I was one of the co-signers of that bill, Chapter 766, with Dave Bartley and Mike Daly. Mike Daly? Yeah, Mike Daly from Brighton, the chairman of the Education Committee. You know, here's what I see. You know, I see all these issues like this, or especially this issue here of education, and I don't really see the focus on it from a political or a media perspective. You know, I remember the early debates on school choice and vouchers and all that, and let's be honest about it. The cards are stacked, yes, against poor kids. They're also stacked against the Catholic Church, too. You know, they don't have the political power. And I don't know if they ever did, to be honest with you. You know, look at that 1963 that we just saw up there, that when a lot of these laws, you know, took hold. You had a Catholic president of the United States. He was supposed to have a major revolution, a major change in America against this Catholic discrimination, but you haven't. The professor made some kind of comment, and she said, Nancy, some of those conditions we are still being played out today. You didn't say what those were, but let me tell you one that I think. How in the name of heavens can you possibly have a situation that is existing in the world today in terms of genocide? We know what genocide is. I was in Rwanda during genocide. I was one of the first persons to call that to the world's attention, genocide. Genocide is a systematic exclusion, extermination of people because of their religion or their race. Well, that's what's happening in the world today, in many parts of the Middle East, against Christians. And we don't hear a darn word about that in the American press or by the business community or by our political leaders. You have an election that's going on a half an hour from here, the first in the nation primary, that is going to select the next president of the United States, and I hear no conversation about this issue whatsoever. Why is that? If this is genocide, as I claim, as I suggest that it is, then that means that there is a moral and a political obligation on the part of the international community, including the United States, to do something about it. Because if we don't, we are all culpable to that situation. Just like what happened in Nazi Germany during the Holocaust. Everybody was culpable, responsible for what happened to 6 million Jews in Germany and Poland and in Austria and other countries. My friends, we are facing these kind of problems right before our eyes. We've got good people on both sides, as the superintendent suggested, but there's no dialogue, Superintendent. You're new to the state, but there is not this dialogue that is taking place. You have good people like Gosnell, you have good people like from the academic community, you have good people from the Catholic Church. Except for the Pioneer Institute, Jamie, I don't know who else runs a show like this. I don't know who else brings people together like this. Let's have a show of hands. Who is here from the Boston media? Nobody from the Boston media on such an important issue? Look at it, 4 of you walked outside here and we protested about something. You know, I could pick up the phone and call the newspapers and every media outlet in Boston would come up. Pick an issue. It doesn't matter what the issue is. We'll pick at the Seaport Hotel with Jim Carmody down here, and you'll get 4 people outside, and you'll have a show of force from the media that'll be unbelievable. So, you know, we have an obligation now to start changing the dynamics ourselves. Don't forget, you know, it didn't take a whole wave of people to start a movement in the United States, whatever that movement was, whether it was the civil rights movement, or whether it was even this Know Nothing. How many people were a part of that Know Nothing organization? I don't know, but it wasn't a part of it wasn't a major group of people. My friends, that's what our challenge is here today. We have to get this issue back on the political agenda. You know, is it apathy? Is it lack of knowledge? Is it lack of media? Let me give you one example, one little story. I was attending Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I used to talk like this, as I am to you, whenever I had the chance talking before students from across the world who receiving their doctoral or master's degree. And I don't think really people could believe it. They couldn't understand this know-nothing era, anti-Catholic sentiment, anti-poor people sentiment in the United States. I don't think they really fully understood it. And one day, one of the professors who became United States Senator was Daniel Patrick Moynihan, my dear friend from the state of New York. Daniel Patrick Moynihan came walking in as one of our visiting professors and said the same thing that all of you are talking about here today, the very same conversation. And my students afterwards, my friends and my fellow students said, Ray, when you were talking like this, I didn't really think it was true. But now Daniel Patrick Moynihan, such an intellectual scholar and a United States Senator and former professor over here at Harvard School of Education, is talking like this. So, you know, how is it that we didn't hear this? How is it that we're not hearing about the inequities that are taking place in society? My last point. Why is it? Well, because there are certain people that don't want these issues in the forefront. Where, if they did, there'd be a lot of attention to this conference here today. There'd be a lot of people that would be outraged hearing these stories. They'd be happy to hear some of the solutions. They'd be happy to hear the unanimity that exists among us, even though there's difference of opinion about how we get there. But we're not going to get anywhere if we don't have this dialogue. As I say, there's this election going on up in New Hampshire, which is the first in the nation's primary. There's a major major candidates forum up there next Thursday night, I believe it is. Will this issue come up about education and school vouchers, school choice, alternative education? Will the issue of genocide against Catholics and parts of the Middle East or Christians, will that come up? Well, you're looking at somebody who spent almost half a century in politics, working with presidents and governors and popes and consulting many of them on many issues, but no one's asking us, are they, about the issues that brought us here today. Why is that? We have to do something about that, my friends. Every cause begins with us, begins with you. And we can't wait for somebody else to do it or take the initiative. We've got to do it ourselves. Thank you very much.
So we have some additional follow-up questions, but I think in the interest of time, and I think the quality of the presentations from the panelists, in fact, covered a lot of those questions. Anyway, I think what we're going to do in the final 5 or 10 minutes is open up for audience Q&A. And so, Matt has a microphone. Just introduce yourselves and direct, the question toward the panelists that you'd like to have answered, and make sure it's a question too.
It's good to see you again, Raymond Flynn. First time I met you was 19. You allowed me to speak at the State House with Charlie Doyle to speak on the pro-life legislation you had. And Kathleen Mears and Thomas Gosnell. I'm the new principal at Immaculate Conception in Revere. I've worked as 27 years in adult literacy. I've seen the results of people going through public school systems for 10, 11, 12 years, reading and writing, performing math at the 3rd or 4th grade level. And that's a sad commentary, that many children move through school systems and they become adults. And then they find out in a moment, why wasn't I ever taught that way? The issues that are confronting our homes, our communities and schools, how do we teach? I've been educated in the public and private schools. One of my children, who is in Israel now, discerning his vocation, graduated from Framingham Public High School. He concluded at the end of his graduation, there is no meaning in life. That's what the public school education is giving many children across this country, because they're missing 2 fundamental factors, wisdom and understanding. They're excluded from the school system and from our thinking process because they are rooted in spirituality, and God is excluded. And the great philosophers, moralists, and our Savior Jesus are excluded from the dialogue. Many readers in the last professional development meeting that I attended, someone who works with people with learning disabilities for many years, he said the Psalms, when he read them, gave him insight to reading. If we can allow people and children to have insight, then they will progress. The family will be stronger, the schools will be stronger. But the dialogue of a full and complete liberal arts education of wisdom, knowledge, understanding, and organization have to be the foundation for a well-rounded child, a well-rounded family, a well-rounded society. And those 2 columns on our educational system are badly missing. Because when we can give an insight to a question or an idea, you light up a person's mind and their heart, and they see things from a different perspective. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Terrence Smith. I'm a graduate of Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, and a Catholic college. And to your point, Ambassador Flynn, I think the larger issue here is income inequality and the lack of increase in incomes in middle-class families. When I was at St. Ignatius High School in Cleveland in the 70s, less than 5% of the students were on some sort of scholarship. Today it's 75%. I paid my own tuition my junior and senior year working in the priest's kitchen. But my greater question is about control. Dr. Kendall mentioned that, said when the state gets involved, the state wants more control. The former president of my high school said, the purpose of our education is to give a young man the tools whereby he can answer the question, what does God want from me? Is that possible with publicly funded Catholic education?
Yes. Like I said, I spent 31 years in Indiana where the Catholic schools are still Catholic. We still require the teaching of religion, and the voucher is seen as just like it is for a college kid. You know, it's money to go to the school of your choice. The parents know what's going to be taught. There's no saying Kids don't have to take religion or anything like that. And in fact, when we testified, we meaning the church, we said if you say we can't teach religion or kids can opt out, we will opt out of the program. Because the church's primary purpose for the schools is the teaching of the faith. So you can have it.
When I, as I said, junior high and high school, I went to Catholic schools. There was no attempt in those days by the Catholic schools to get state aid or public aid. And one of the reasons I remember opposition was, well, we don't want the strings that are going to come with it. Okay, because, you know, in public education, there's no question that the government has very substantial say in what happens. So that clearly, you know, is one of the arguments. If aid comes to religious schools, the state control with it. Now, vouchers are not quite the same thing, because there you're giving it directly to the parents, but the same issue gets raised. I think it's a legitimate issue, you know, quite frankly. And this issue that we're talking about today, I mean, this has been going on for decades and decades and decades. That issue will too.
It was already stated, I think, by all the people who spoke here today that there are many wonderful and outstanding public schools in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the recent test scores indicate that. But it also indicates that there are a number of cities in Massachusetts that the children aren't receiving the education that they need and deserve. We know that. And let me give you one little anecdotal story. I pick up one of my grandchildren who goes to Catholic Academy in South Boston, Old St. Bridget's School. And I'm in the school playground waiting for the school to get over at 2:30 to get let out. And I see this young woman come jumping out of a cab, a mother. And she was a couple minutes late, but she was all worked up about her child. She's sorry she's late and so forth. And the teacher was holding the child. I was watching the whole thing. And she's a waitress at a hotel in Boston. And she works her rear end off in order to pay that tuition, which is high for her. She can't afford it. You can have all these conversations you want about economics and charter schools and vouchers. Where I come from, I think about that woman. That's what forms my opinion about what I should do as a public official. That woman, that family, that mother wants the best for her child. And because she doesn't have money, even though she's working hard and her husband's working hard, she shouldn't be denied, and that child should not be denied that education. If we can send money to all these countries across the world that deny human rights to individuals, why in hell can't we give that lady who come jumping out of that cab the other day a little voucher so she can send the child to the school that she wants that child to go to, that she believes that child will get the best education? She's American, she's a taxpayer, she's a citizen, she's a human being, she's a member of a family, the cornerstone and the foundation of our society. That's what made America great. Those are the people we should be looking out for. By the way, I have an honorary doctorate degree from St. Ignatius in Cleveland. Yep, and the head of the Military Chaplain Society is a graduate of St. Ignatius, Timothy Broglio, and I think Tim Russett, former, yeah, in Cleveland.
Yeah, John Carroll.
Yeah.
Now, Ignatius
It's the high school.
The high school.
Yeah.
John Carroll.
My name is Jim Carmody. I'm from the Seaport Hotels that I hope is not going to be picketed soon. I did want to share a few statistics about a small Catholic school here, Cathedral High School in the South End. 60% of the student population is non-Catholic. A great percentage are from single-parent households. Most families are first-generation American. English is often not the primary language in the home. In the past 7 years, 100% of the students have gotten into college. The cost per pupil is less than public alternative. The one thing here I think that hasn't been discussed about an opportunity to reduce cost is that the primary competition for students going to Cathedral is the charter schools, because they want something special, and for economic reasons they'd rather do that. 100% of the students at Cathedral are on scholarship, so if there was a voucher program, instead of that queue trying to get into the charter schools, some of those kids could go to Cathedral and it could work.
My name is Steve Kaiser. I'm from Cambridge, and I'd like to say a few words about the value of Catholic education from the viewpoint of an agnostic from New Jersey. I ended up going to MIT in Cambridge, got 3 engineering degrees, and then a few years later, I was a volunteer teacher of computers at 5 Catholic schools, including the Blessed Sacrament School in Cambridge. 3 years later, it was closed down. And I had a special session where they invited parents and principals from other schools so that the parents would have a choice of other Catholic schools where they could send the kids to go to. And one of those principals came up to me and said, "Oh, could I see your computer room?" I said, "Oh, sure." She says, "That was the first classroom that I ever taught in, 1948. She was 17 years old, had 1 summer of preparation, and then came to Blessed Sacrament for a 2nd grade classroom of 70 boys. 70 boys. Take this whole room and imagine 70 noisy little boys and a 17-year-old rookie trying to teach the class. She couldn't do it. She went to the other teacher who had the 70 girls, and they swapped, and it worked, okay? But this was her life for 40 years. And some of those nuns would be paid $3,000 a year as a stipend to live on. They had room and board, they had retirement. But these women, these nuns who put their lives into that, from the agnostic's viewpoint, this was tremendous. It was very impressive. And I think it speaks to all the teachers, too, at public schools who have that commitment. We have a messed up situation in many of our schools. The reforms are very bad in many ways. But I think speaking to a lot of the individual teachers and the commitment they made, it was just so important. Thank you.
I think we're asking less questions, Jimmy, and to the panel, thank you. But I wanted to add perhaps an analogy. My name is Steve Aiken. I'm a public school product, first in my family to ever go to college. I live in Weston. My youngest daughter, Weston, was not a good school for her. I sent her to a private school in Maine that has a learning center that's had it for 30 years called Kent's Hill because they could meet her needs better. My point I want to make very quickly is to draw an analogy with another industry altogether. I started with AT&T as a management trainee in New York City. At that time when I joined AT&T, I thought it was the best possible model for delivering phone service in the world. You had Western Electric Manufacturing, you had Bell Labs with more patents than anybody else as an organization. You didn't overspend on capital. You didn't have separate lines going down every street. You were looking for universal service. I was convinced, almost in an evangelical way, that this was one of the best ways possible to produce communications for the United States. Then this evil man, Judge Green, came along in 1984 and said the Bell system had to break up. I was sure that the world would fall apart, that poor people would never have communications again, that our capital would go crazy, and in general the world would fall apart. And I was moving up the ranks of AT&T as well, so I wasn't so happy about that. Turns out, 8 years later, we have the internet. At that time, in '84, you had 3 phones. You had a Standard, a Princess, and a Trendline. Your big choice was what colors you get. Think of the phone choices you have today. Think of whether the inner city has phones. Think of the choices. When I think about all of the things going on in education, when you think about the role of the web, Khan Institute, private schools, Catholic schools, Jewish schools, we have many, many ways of doing it. What we need to support is change. And the embedded monopoly doesn't understand because they're doing so much good and they feel good about it, just like AT&T. They have no idea what can happen when you give everyone choice and the market can do something. I'm sorry that wasn't a question. Member President, do you agree?
So that might be a good way to end an event that celebrates Milton Friedman's birthday. I want to thank all of you for attending. I especially want to thank Kara and Nancy and our panelists for the engaging discussion. I think we covered a lot of territory in just a couple hours. But before we end, I want to tell everybody that we've got copies of Nancy's book here for you folks to buy, but also for her to sign. So don't forget those. And we've got other events coming up into the fall on Voc Tech schools and U.S. history and other topics. Hope you'll keep yourself connected to Pioneer. Thanks so much.
And you